Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. Idiot boss tells me to make a cake wrong. I argued and he told me he knew better than me. I made the cakes, they were terrible, customers were peeved and he had to admit his errors. The second story. Head of the department was negligent about my remarks, which concerned the health of our animal. So he's reprimanded, put on vacation, and forced to rewrite standard procedures for caring for each animal. The third story. She wanted root beer even though we didn't have it, so I gave her root beer syrup. The first story is, that's not how cakes work. This happened 4 years ago at a now closed small bakery. The owner was an a-hole who thought that the sun shines out his A, and because he had taken a couple of Wilton decorating classes that he knew everything about baking. This dude was a joke, expected to make a profit in the first year and didn't plan anything at all, relying on his staff to try and make up for his shortcomings. I'm going to call him Dan. A little bit of backstory about me. I graduated from Le Cordon Bleu with a certificate in patisserie and baking in 2012. From there, I specialized in breads, making artisan breads at High V for nearly 3 years. I've always loved baking and enjoyed learning about the process for creating recipes and the science behind what makes baked things the way they are. I don't claim to know everything about baking, not by a long shot. I'm continually learning and take pride in accepting when I don't know something, and learning from those experiences. In short, I'm capable of admitting when I'm wrong and trying again. Dan was not. For those not familiar, there's something called the baker's percentage that is used when calculating recipes. Basically, you base everything off the amount of flour in a recipe. So if you had 500 grams flour and 250 grams water, the percentage of water would be 50%. This is helpful in multiplying recipes, converting units, creating new recipes, or altering existing ones. It is used heavily in bread baking, and I've used it quite a bit professionally. Enter Dan, middle-aged former hotel manager who received a $150,000 inheritance from his mom, and thought that would be enough to fully fund and convert a former retail space into a kitchen. He 100% thought he would be profitable within the first year. This is not a thing, especially in the food industry. The general rule is 3 years minimum. He was quick-tempered but non-confrontational, did not like to have his authority questioned, and was more than a little bit sexist. Enter me, a 22-year-old girl with opinions. I prefer to be blunt and to the point, have thick skin, and am not afraid to speak my mind. I'm respectful of people who deserve it. Dan was not one of those people. He didn't feel this way. However, because he was older than me, he knew better and just needed to shut up and do what he said. The MC part. Dan didn't have any original recipes, and instead stole them from the internet, bloggers, etc. The chocolate cake recipe we had was amazing. Came out perfect every time. Was fluffy but moist and just generally delicious. LPT, the secret is coffee. The white vanilla recipe, however, was not great. We went through multiple that would be too dry, fall apart, etc. I offered my recipe, which has always been well received, and I've never had complaints about, but Dan had a different idea. Since the chocolate cake recipe was so good, we would use that, but instead of cocoa, we would add in 1.5 times the amount of flour. So if the recipe called for 1 cup of cocoa, we would add an extra 1.5 cups of flour and just use water instead of coffee. What? The amount of things wrong with this is impressive, and as soon as he told me that, I think my brain short-circuited for a minute. At this point, I'd been working there for a few months and knew that arguing with him was useless, but I tried anyway. I take pride in producing delicious food for my customers, and this would be not. I argued with him for a good 10 minutes, tried explaining baker's percentage, that if we increased flour, we would have to alter the entire recipe, that it wouldn't work, etc. He wasn't having any of it and ended up yelling in my face that he had been doing this a lot longer than me, and I just needed to shut up and do what I was told. Okay, Dan, you see? So I smiled and did exactly what he said. We generally made large batches of cake batter at once, enough for a couple days worth of cakes. I checked with him at every step, making sure that I was following his directions to a T. I checked the amounts of flour, baking powder, water, milk, everything with him to the point where I was annoying. I didn't care. Dan knew what he was doing and my silly young girl brain just didn't know how things worked, so I wanted it to be right. We ended up making 4 vanilla cakes and 1 lemon cake from this batch, and they all were exactly as expected. They were literal bricks, heavy, dry, and just all around terrible. He saw this and said they were fine, that they would taste better than the other recipes and I should just put some simple syrup on them when I torted them for decoration. Simple syrup wasn't going to save these, but I complied, doing what I could to make them at least edible. I decorated the cakes, sent them out, and went on with my day. It didn't take long for the complaints to come back. About a week or two later, I came into work to a royally peeved off Dan. He was already upset that his business was losing money and that the vanilla cake had been getting complaints. He started in on me, telling me that I needed to change the recipe, that it was my fault that it had been bad for so long, and that the people with the lemon cake were particularly peeved about the incident, as it was a remake of one that he had effed up previously. I let him rip into me, keeping my calm until he finished, and I looked at him with the most innocent expression and said, "Dan, weren't those the cakes you told me to make like the chocolate one? I thought you knew what you were talking about and that they would be way better." He turned red, stared at me for a minute, and then mumbled something before walking away. My coworker had been there for the whole thing, and about fell over laughing, telling me that she was proud of me for not letting the a-hole get away with his BS for once. My husband and I often say effing Dan whenever we hear of someone doing something obnoxious like this, or when we hear of someone else named Dan. And yeah, it's not cooking. If you forget something, you can't add it in as easily as when you cook, and you sure as hell can't just swap things around for fun. Some people don't realize exactly how much time, effort, and skill go into running a successful bakery and restaurant. They watch 2 seasons of the Great British Cooking Show and think they know everything. The second story is, you told me not to answer. So when I was younger and had very limited job options in my field, I worked a summer at zoological and aquarium institution that later gained a very bad reputation, caring for the reptiles and amphibians. For some reason, armadillos were also under my care, because obviously they look like reptiles from far away, so they must be reptiles. Anyway, because I wasn't a presenter, I wasn't supposed to answer any guest questions about the animals, and had been reprimanded several times for answering basic questions about the species ecology, like what they eat, where they live, predators, etc. I was supposed to direct any questions to the signage, and could answer no questions except the name of the animal and its species. Towards the end of my time there, one of the armadillos in the habitat died. She was extremely old, nothing bad or painful. The other of the 2 armadillos was very visibly distressed, suddenly being alone. His species can live alone, but often live in small groups, and regardless, this individual was very distressed living alone. I brought this issue to the department head, who more or less dismissed it. He's a businessman, not a zoologist. It doesn't really matter to him if one of the hundreds of animals is a bit distressed, is the vibe I got from him. Quite peeved off, I began preparing very detailed logs of the armadillo's behavior, as management is legally required to intervene if there's a valid medical concern for the animal's health. Several days later, a guest came in and was watching the armadillo. She was a nice little old lady and was very curious about him. Lady: "Oh, it's so silly. Is it a boy or a girl?" Checking for supervisors around me. "He's a boy." L: "Oh, cute. How old is he? Where did he come from?" Me: "He's 5, so he's still fairly young. He'd be a teenager or a young adult if he was human. His species is from South America, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia. He himself was born at another zoo, but had to move because their habitat couldn't keep as many as they had." L: "Oh, so they're social? Why is he alone?" Me: "I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to answer questions about the animals." She looks very confused. Me: "I'm just here to care for the animals. I'm not supposed to answer questions directly about them." Catching on. L: "Was he always alone?" Me: "I'm not supposed to answer questions about animals we no longer have either." L: "Do you happen to have a manager I can speak to?" Me: "I do. You should really direct those last few questions his way." She very sweetly expresses her concern for the armadillo. When department head openly lies about him not being social and never having lived with another armadillo, she asks for the phone number for the corporate office. The very next day, big-time corporate guy visits our department and examines what's going on. Armadillo is relocated to a habitat with a few other armadillos, where his stereotypic behaviors nearly disappear. Department head is reprimanded, placed on leave, and forced to rewrite standard procedures for care for every species under his supervision. Department head was never outright mean, but it was certainly negligence for the mammals. The reptiles and amphibians, everything was always very well done, but mammals need a lot more attention than them, and he didn't ever step up to that. Lying to a sweet old lady to cover your A is also pretty messed up. Edit: people love them. They're really spastic and goofy, and pretty cute when they aren't ripping up the garden. Also, he was a smaller exotic one, being from South America, and this was in the US, so many people thought he was a baby or something, being half the size of a 9-banded. The last story is, she wanted root beer, I gave her root beer. Some backstory. My relatives used to own this food truck where I would occasionally work there. We did festivals and other events where you have food trucks. We served usual things that were deep fried. These things included deep fried mashed potatoes, deep fried macaroni and cheese, and foreshadowing, deep fried root beer. We didn't just take the stuff and throw it in the fryers. We had a method that would recreate the original food item but deep fried. For example, the deep fried mashed potatoes and gravy were balls of mashed potatoes that were thickened using cornstarch, breaded in some kind of fry breading. I don't know, I was like 10 to 13 and I was the only cashier. Frozen deep fried when ordered and covered in gravy. They were surprisingly good. The deep-fried root beer was the same thing, except it was possibly donut dough balls fried and covered in root beer syrup instead of gravy. The story. So it was a pretty hot day, and we were pretty slow because pretty much nobody wants deep-fried food when it's 35 degrees Celsius out. We would occasionally get a person, but they would usually buy a Coke or Mountain Dew and that's it. So this girl walks up and no joke, she looks like a side character out of a movie about mean high school girls. She had the trashiest jeans shorts that looked like she just took a pair of scissors and cut them up herself. The ugliest shirt, I used the term lightly, and the heels so high that I half expected her to have to use her friends as crutches. She also had so much makeup on that she looked like a clown. I mean, I get wearing shorts and light clothes when it's hot out, but you don't need to cut your clothes so they can have as many holes and streaks possible without showing anything. Her two friends with her looked just the same. That was already a big red flag that I was in for a bad time. So they walk up and immediately start complaining. She glanced at the menu and said to her friends, "Ugh, this food looks absolutely disgusting. Who the F would eat this?" So she walks up to me and this is the conversation. Her, what drinks do you have? Everything's on the menu. She was just too stupid to read it, but I read her off the drinks anyway. Me, water, lemonade, and pop. H, I need root beer, they want it too. M, we don't have root beer. H, are you stupid? It's on your sign over there. The words deep fried was written in all caps in front of every deep fried item. M, that's deep fried root beer. H, well, can I have it not deep fried? M, hang on a second. H, hurry the F up, we're like dying of thirst. My boss was busy cleaning up in preparation for the next customers, so she didn't notice much of what's going on. I told her about the moron and proposed my idea. Now, root beer syrup was pretty cheap and she loved a bit of revenge, so she allowed me to go through with my plan. I got the bucket of syrup, used a measuring cup to fill all 3 cups with the syrup, and put ice in lids on like a normal drink. Just in case you don't know what pop syrup is like, it's like pop, but it's like a goopy flat version of it. It smells just like the pop, but it's just disgusting to drink. I walked back up to the register area and charged her for the drinks before giving them to her and her friends. They all took a drink and were immediately horrified. The first girl in the back spat her drink out on the ground. It's just grass because we're in an outdoor festival. And the other one ran to the trash can next door to us and started vomiting. The original B started screaming at me. Nobody was out because of the heat, and food trucks were pretty spaced apart, so really nobody saw what happened. H, what the F did you give us? My boss notices and almost speaks to her, but I signal to my boss that I got this. Me, I gave you what you asked for, root beer that's not deep fried. H opens the drink and shows me the inside. That is not root beer. M, yes it is. We didn't have carbonated root beer, so it's just the syrup used to make root beer. H, are you effing kidding me? I just want some root beer. Are you too effing stupid to understand that? M, I told you we don't have root beer as a drink. What else am I supposed to do? Just teleport it from a store? She just got even more mad and stomped off with her friends. My boss and I had a good laugh. I still can't believe to this day that there are people that would verbally assault a 10 to 13-year-old, but at least she got what she asked for, a mouthful of root beer syrup. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.